Oh no, really?
I know what happens to the tuna brain. I mean, it just like runs rampant, and the fish just reach these mythical proportions.
A 200-pounder, but there's more likely 150, you said.
Yeah, they call it 200-pounder, but I know these people. And another friend of mine went out and got a 120-pounder. That's probably an 80-pounder.
Everybody has a mutual understanding that some mathematical calculations need to be done at either end with each with each discussion of fish size.
Adjustments.
Welcome to the Wild Dispatch.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Wild Dispatch. I'm Robin and I'm back with more skills and stories from the wild. First of all, thanks to everyone who's back for more, and to everyone who's a new visitor, welcome aboard. I guess there's a bit of a nautical theme in that one. That's a clue for this episode. But whether you're new or an old salty sea dog can resist, be sure to give this show a follow or subscribe to make sure you get a proper helping of wild, free-range nuggets each week. If you happen to enjoy this episode or any of the others, then it'll be a great help to me to just pause for a second and leave a 5-star review. It goes a long way with the algorithmy things. The algorithmy thingamies. Or even better, you could sling a message out to a friend or two who you think might enjoy this podcast. Now, I'm excited to say that Ejler is back. He's been in high demand, or demand. God, I don't even know what country I'm from these days. He's been in high demand since his first episode, which I think is number 11. That was about 4 or 5 months ago. And this time, he is back and with a tackle box full of fishing stories and tips. If you happen to miss Ejler's previous adventures in the episodes beforehand, that's lots of fishing, hunting, homesteading, and all kinds of wild travels across the country and world, then I suggest you go back and listen because it's an excellent scene setter for understanding where this huge wealth of knowledge is coming from. Now, humble brag, I'm proud to say that I am lucky enough to go out fishing with Ejler on the Pacific, down in Elk. There's a whole little bay there, which doesn't really get much action apart from Ejler and his fishing boat. You may have seen some footage from my Instagram, but he is an absolute master of that area. He's been fishing that specific, I think about 5 square miles, he says in the episode, for over 40 years. And in that time, he's gained like a truly intimate knowledge and understanding of the terrain, the species of rockfish and other fishies that are all over there, the weather, all of that stuff. He just has like a deep, profound understanding. But he's also traveled a bunch, going to other places on big fishing expeditions. I've got various pictures. I think there's some in previous episodes of him holding giant fish with a proud expression on his face. All this to say, he is a magician with a fishing pole. I guess the fishing pole is his wand. But he also happens to be an exceptional teacher, and he's kindly agreed to share his learnings today. And of course, all of that is tied up with a smorgasbord of entertaining stories too. So it's time for me to stop waffling and let's get on with the episode. Here's Ejler.
Don't throw your love away. Oh, no. Ha ha! Fantastic. It brings it to life now to see.
Okay, shall I begin?
Yeah.
All good, or like any? It's no hurry if you need to do something, or
You just go.
okay. Well, hello again, Ejler. Welcome back to the Wild Dispatch.
Hello, Robin. Thanks for having me.
Once again, I am back in your fantastic homestead. Today, we are going to do an episode specifically about fishing and the nuances and the details of fishing off of the Northern California coast near Elk, where you live. Well, I guess you don't live exactly in Elk, but you live in the surroundings of Elk. I've witnessed, you've been fishing for, well, I should also say there are a number of previous podcasts with Ejler, so if you want to hear Ejler's story, then by all means, please go back and listen to his adventures across different continents, chasing and eating animals of all different kinds, and many other details along the way. Obviously, there's more depth to your...
Scarcely.
So, you've been fishing here for over 30 years.
Yeah.
I believe that's
since,
correct.
I think I first dipped the hook in the water in 1983. No, 82, I believe.
Okay, so a long time.
Yeah, it's over 40 years.
Yeah, fantastic. I've been lucky enough to witness your mastery with a rod and reel, and your sort of ability to absolutely just be so violently successful fishing off of in this area. It's astounding, I have to say. So if you'll excuse the pun, today I would love to do a deep dive into all the nuances and the details and information and subtleties of what it is, what the choices are that you make, and why you are fishing in the specific ways that you are for the species that are here. So we're going to cover quite a lot of things today. We're going to talk about ideal equipment, rods, reels, tackle, line, all those things.
Yeah.
There's also some things to talk about, like I think understanding the ocean and things like that, because that's always been something which I've had an absolutely fascinating watching you. There isn't necessarily words happening at that moment, but seeing the super processor going on, watching waves as they come in from the ocean, understanding what's happening, and how that informs the decisions that you're making before and during our time on the water. So we can jump around, and I'm sure a lot of these different subjects will interconnect, but I think for me, the thing that seems like the simplest place to start is the gear that you choose to use. And I think some of this can also be like the progression of gear that you've used as you've learned, but...
Yeah, we can do that. Well, I got to say, in the beginning, I really didn't have any gear being a backpack traveler. I've always been traveling with some hooks and some monofilament in my backpack.
Always?
Always.
Just in case?
Yeah. And I found myself in a situation where they became very valuable trading items. But when it comes to fishing the Pacific Northwest here, that's besides the point. The point is, I didn't have any gear. Mm-hmm. So I end up with the first people who took me in were boat builders. It turns out that my mentor, Kenneth Mobert, at one point made his livelihood as a commercial diver. And so he immediately told me, well, you have to go diving. Okay, I was in his shop building boats, doing these things that you do in a wood shop. He says, we got to get you a wetsuit. I said, okay. I was 100% for it. But he was as enthusiastic as I was. So we go to Santa Rosa and we go to a dive shop, and he tells the clerk what to do and what to find and blah blah, and thickness and neoprene and this and that and shoes and mask and snorkel and tightness and fit, etc., etc. And I come home with a wetsuit, weight belt, snorkel, even a Hawaiian sling.
Right, so this is for the intention of spearing fish underwater.
Correct.
Free diving down.
Correct. And then he tells me, now go dive. I said, aren't you coming? He said, no, I outgrew my wetsuit a long time ago. Now go dive, go on. You know, you go to this place and this place and this place and you'll find something. And the ocean is perfect today. So I went diving and I had an abalone iron with me. And I immediately got a couple of abalone and I got a cabezon. And holy Moses, the wealth of life on the ocean bottom was astonishing.
Really?
Just astonishing.
How far down were you having to dive?
Not far. 6-8 feet.
Wow.
10 feet max.
Yeah.
No need to go any further. Everything was right there. It was like a jungle with canopies. You had to fight your way through to get to the bottom where the cabezon is laying there and being the ambush predator that it is, and very hard to see. But it's like a whole new world opening up. It was fantastic. So I thought, well, the days I can't dive, or I don't want to dive, maybe I can throw a line in the water, catch some fish. But I didn't have a fishing rod.
Yes.
What I did have, however, was the method that I used and learned to use in Mexico fishing from the beach.
Okay.
And that's the number 10 tin can. You know, the big one.
Yes.
And you get some hold of some monofilament and fairly heavy, like 100-pound test or 80-pound test, something like that, something good and sturdy. And then you put a stick in this can as a handle, and now you have fishing equipment. And I'm going to show it to you. I have it right here. This is my can that I made in 1982.
I'm gonna actually video this as well, just in case, because we've got some cameras here. But I just want to put this. I'm gonna do this on this camera.
So I've lost some line, but
Okay.
the idea is still easy enough to understand. This is the tree branch, and a nail is holding it from that side, another nail is holding it from that side, and now you have a handle. You also have a place to tie the line. And then you spool the line onto the can, and at the end of that line was my lure.
Wow, that's a pretty heavy weight.
Yes, it's 16 ounces.
Okay.
So at that time I also had, aside from the 16-ounce jig at the bottom, a set of 3 shrimp flies up above. There were no restrictions to the number of hooks you were allowed to use back then. So my next fishing trip on the Pacific Ocean was in one of Mobert's boats, which was a small 14-foot dinghy that he had for his own yacht. When he sold the yacht, he kept the dinghy because it was a sweet boat. We took that boat out, and like a quarter mile from shore, I dropped this down here, and it was immediately full of fish.
Really?
Yes.
Just straight down.
Yeah,
bam.
straight down, 4 fish, up.
Instant hits.
Back up, you just like get it up. There's no discussion about anything. You're not playing these fish. You're yarding them up. I call this the meat elevator.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds effective.
So later on, my time with Mobert ran out. We only went fishing a couple of times because it was kind of an ordeal, and getting the boat in the water and all of that, all those things. There wasn't an easy launch space anywhere. But it was my introduction. I got to see the ocean bottom, and I got to do some preliminary fishing that showed that man, there's a lot of life here.
Like high potential.
A lot of life here.
So your means, the different ways of fishing, the different kind of gear, you've got your quite simple, like, well, seriously, number 10 tin can with a 100-pound test line, and very basic gear, which is pretty homemade. You just need to basically go buy a giant tin of peaches.
Yeah.
And nip to the fishing store. And then perhaps you've got spearfishing, which is a bit more of a commitment,
It is a commitment. It is a money commitment, and And a physical commitment to get in the water.
But also there's a lot of like your mentor situation. I can imagine people who've outgrown their wetsuits. There's got to be a bunch of secondhand wetsuits for sale.
Yes, there are.
Or wetsuits
Oh
looming
boy.
in people's attics somewhere. So getting hold of that's pretty simple. But then, so that's spearfishing. And tell me if I'm jumping too far ahead. But then the natural progression after that is rod and reel. Is that the next step, or am I jumping ahead?
Well, I befriended a person up here in Elk.
Okay.
After I moved from my boat building apprenticeship in Wallala, and I moved to Elk, I befriended a person who was fishing out of a homemade dory, a rowboat.
Okay.
He invited me fishing. It was an 18-foot boat. It was a fairly heavy boat, but not really that heavy, judged by yesteryear standards. It was about 250 pounds. Too heavy for one person to handle himself. It was based on a beach, so you had to get it up on the beach. You had to get it down to the water's edge when you want to go fishing. It takes two people. And, not everybody is interested in going out on the Pacific Ocean in an open rowboat. So I got to be a steady partner for Neil in his Swampscott dory, which was a thing of beauty. He had done a fantastic job on that boat. And I fished with this tin can. He fished with his second-hand gear that he scrounged from flea markets and such. And I fished with this here. We were both like really primitive fishermen and prided ourselves a bit about just how primitive we could be.
Yeah.
And we caught fish. If we were plodding about blindly, I didn't know what the ocean bottom looked like.
Mm-hmm.
You got to be on rock bottom in order to catch good fish out here. There is fish on sand bottom, but they're limited to the flat fish for the most part.
Okay.
And those are flounders, sand dabs, halibut, sole. But they are not everywhere. They find their spots. Where are those spots? We don't know. We fish in Elk. The nearest harbor you can put a boat in is 8 miles away, 6, 7, 8 miles away. Mm-hmm. Very few other fishermen come down here. So we are not a part of a community who kind of spread information around them. And little by little you get to find out where are the good spots.
Okay. I mean, we can get to that now. If that's the route that we need to take.
No, I think the plot is that we didn't know anything.
Okay.
The line at this point here, neither Neil or I really knew anything.
Not much expertise between you.
No. And very, very primitive gear.
So when did you obviously at some point moved on to upgrading to rods and reels?
Yes, I did. And that was caused by the loss of very large salmon, which I wasn't able to play with my number 10 can.
What happened?
All. Well, so it took my jig by accident. Actually, it took one of the shrimp flies that was above the jig. And then it takes off, and it was a very large salmon, probably 35, 40 pounds, something like that. Uh-huh. And then it takes off, and all you can do is really like either stop it or let line run out. There's no in between.
And it doesn't look like there's a lot of line on that can.
No, I lost a bit of line. There was more.
Okay.
There has been a lot more.
It's still a very limited amount of time that you have.
I think I probably had 200 yards on it.
Okay.
So there was plenty of line.
Yeah.
But there's no in between letting full loose or stopping. That's no way of playing a salmon.
Yeah.
Especially a big one.
Yeah.
I'm used to rockfish where you can just like yard them up. Mm-hmm. And if it's a lingcod, which is a little bit different, then it makes one run and it runs all the way down to the floor. You can start over again.
Yes.
A salmon, you can't play a salmon with this equipment.
It just keeps going.
So I lost that salmon. The hook straightened out. The salmon got away. And I was left with the feeling, this is not right. I wanted that fish. But this is not the way to do it. So I succumbed. I went out and I bought myself some fishing gear. at a garage sale, just like Neil. So I went out and I bought this rod and reel here.
And is this? Yeah, describe this rod and reel. It looks old, but it doesn't look too far from the kind of rod and reel setups that we have.
No, this is almost like a gold standard of how reels were made. This is a pen, coffee grinder style. You know, it's fairly large. Mm-hmm. This is big enough to be a tuna setup. This is really a tuna reel.
So it's a real shorter, stiffer.
Very,
rod.
very stiff rod. Mm-hmm. I didn't want to drop my uncompromising attitude towards fishing, which was one based on greed, I would say, probably. I just want to catch as much fish as possible. So I put some 80-pound braided Dacron on here, which was like a very early version of braided line.
Okay.
You can see it's pretty thick.
Yeah.
80-pound braided is a lot thinner nowadays. Mm-hmm. And then this very, very stout, very, very stiff rod. It was still the meat elevator. And with a 16-ounce jig and 3 swim flies, it was a meat elevator. Down, fill up, back up. It wasn't always like that, of course.
Yeah.
But we did catch a lot of fish. Mm. And there was no finesse to it.
So I'm curious, because I guess we're talking about gear, and this is the context of what you started with, which is pretty strong. You said 80-pound line.
Yeah.
Meat and the meat elevator, as you so
ridiculously unsophisticated, my friend.
Delicately put. But that's clearly not. Now the rods that we're using have a lot more flex, and the line is a lot lighter. The test line is a lot lighter. It's 20 pounds.
Yeah,
20-pound test line.
After a while, I found another rod at a garage sale. This one here has
much more flex.
A nice flex to it. Mm-hmm. And I have 20-pound test. That's correct on it. And a smaller, more delicate reel is a Abu Garcia Swedish reel. Very nice. It's seen better days. It sounds like it's got gravel in the bearings. It doesn't. It still works. I use it as my descender rig for the fish that I want to return to the floor.
Okay.
But for quite a few years, this was my fishing gear.
Mm. And definitely a more sophisticated step up.
Oh yeah, a little bit more finesse. And I also switched away. Around that time, rules came in about how many hooks you can fish with, and it switched from you can have as many hooks as you want to 2.
Max of 2.
2 hooks only.
And is that still the rule today?
Yeah.
Excuse me. Excuse me.
Yes, that is the rule today. 2 hooks only.
Okay.
So I switched to 2 hooks. That was fine. In the meantime, I had gotten a good idea about what the ocean floor was looking like in my area. There's an element to rowboat fishing. I should say, my friend Neil's Swampscott dory, that thing of beauty that he had built. He left it on the beach past October 1st. October 1st is the cutoff date for when you should get out of the beach. And the reason is that the ocean changes nature. It switches from summer ocean to fall ocean around that time. And the big swells start coming in.
You can actually hear them.
Yeah.
You hear the difference already, the power.
The power is like completely on a different scale. And with the right swell from the right direction, the beach where Neil had his boat gets swept all the way up to the bluff. There's the bluff. There's a fairly narrow beach, no more than 50 yards from the bluff to the water's edge. And the elevation difference at the bluff to the water's edge is probably no more than 15 feet. And with the right swell, the ocean reaches all the way up to the bluff. And it did that on that fateful day in 1987. When, actually it was in 1986, when a storm came in and lifted his boat off the beach and turned it into kindling.
Oh, just smashed it against the...
Oh yeah, just rolls in the surf. End. That's the end. Rolls it back and forth a couple of times, ground to pieces. Immediately. That was the end of that boat. That lit a fire in me to build my own boat, which I did.
Okay.
Get started. Now's the time. No more dicking around.
No one else to take you out in a boat.
I've been wanting to build a boat for many years, and now I had the right motivation, and I commenced building the boat in 1986, and it was launched in December of 1987. My first fishing season in my own boat was in 88, July 88.
And what gear were you using at that point? That was the more flexible rod?
No, I was still on the big boy, the big bad boy.
The big bad boy.
Yeah, the big bad boy was still ruling.
I'm going to post a picture before I put this in. When I put this, share this podcast, I'll post a photo of these rods so that people can see if they're not looking at the visual side of this podcast. Okay, so
then I switched to a little bit more sophisticated, lighter gear. I got tired of this approach. I guess it's part of growing up. And you could call me a late bloomer. But I guess I got my killing instinct like satiated, maybe. And I wanted to be a little bit more in touch with what's going on between me and the fish. Because with that heavy gear, heavy line, heavy rod, you just register you have a fish on, bring it in. There's no more communication needed.
There's no nuance.
No nuance. No, it's not very refined.
Which is, and now I understand why you call it the meat elevator, or the fish elevator, I guess.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, that makes more sense now. Well, I mean, it made sense anyway, but...
Yeah, my relationship with fishing has changed a lot over time in that direction.
And has that changed? I mean, obviously the gear that you've used, that you use now, well, maybe you should describe what you've evolved to now, because you've talked about what the next steps were, something with more subtlety. So what do you use now? What is, like, in your opinion, the gold standard for fishing, in the waters from a boat, fishing rockfish, around the areas where we often fish in Northern California?
Well, being out in the rowboat is kind of an intimate experience of nature. You're you're having a kind of a conjugal relationship with the elements out there, because you have dragged a little bit of solid ground with you to balance yourself between two elements of different viscosity, each of them kind of foreign for us. We don't live up in the air, we don't live in the water, we live on land. When you bring a boat like that out, it's very thin, it's very light. The boat I built was meant to be handled solo person, which I've done many times. It's still a roomy and seaworthy boat. It's 20 feet long, it's 5 foot beam, 5 foot in width. Very seaworthy, very light, 1/4 inch plywood hull to keep the weight down. I did everything I could to keep the weight down. That means that you're sitting on a vulnerable piece of survival equipment.
Okay.
And that brings you close to the water, emotionally and physically and vulnerably. You're close to the water. So everything that goes on around you, you have a keen consciousness about. And I think that consciousness translates also to your relationship with the fish, or it did to me. More sensitivity demands lighter gear.
Okay.
The lighter the gear, the more direct your connection is with what's going on down there at the bottom of the ocean. So it was a natural movement towards lighter and lighter gear. So what I ended up, what I'm fishing with now, this is a different kind of a reel. It's a spinning reel versus the coffee grinder style or bait caster. I don't know why they call it bait caster, because most people can't really cast with those reels. But that's what they're called. And I've gone away from them for exactly that reason. The spinning reel, to me, is a better casting machine.
Okay, so beforehand it was like the coffee can things underneath, like much simpler, heavier duty kind of thing, and this spinning reel, which is actually what I have on my rod and reel as well, by chance, mostly by accident, I think. And so that is far more proficient at tossing a line far out from the boat.
Yeah, well, I think so. Yes, it is. It's meant to cast with ease and without resistance. So this is a 9-foot rod, which is a little bit big for a boat rod, I would say, and most people would agree.
And what's the kind of, there are, and forgive me because people are going to laugh at this, but I don't have a great understanding. It has like varying stiffness and different kind of settings, right, for whatever rod you're going to buy. What is this like? So it's 9 foot in length.
It's 9 foot in length. So it has a couple of specifications.
Okay.
Specs.
Specs.
And it says right here, okay, it says 9 foot in length. It says moderately fast. Moderately fast has to do with how bendable is it really out here in the last 3 or 4 feet.
Okay.
Why they call that, why they use a label that's related to speed is a little bit of a foggy reasons. I don't really know why. But there's a flexibility out here at the tip of the reel, and this is moderately fast. Then it says 12 to 20 ounce mono or 7 to 30 ounce, 12 to 20 pound mono or 17 to 30 pound braid. That's about the line.
Yes.
And that's what's a comfortable thickness of line that this rod would like. Thinner, not so much. Because it is too stiff for thinner lines. It would put too much of a burden on the line if it was thrown, if it were cast with a rod of this stiffness.
So it could snap the line?
It could snap the line.
So you just end up tossing your tackle into the ocean.
Yeah, yeah. You would be tossing the tackle into the ocean. Yes, it could, absolutely. A thinner line needs a softer rod.
Okay.
And then it says 3/4 to 3 ounce lure. Any thicker, any heavier than 3 ounces would put too much of a strain on this rod and could break it. And I've broken rods in the past by fishing with too heavy of a lure.
Okay.
Any lighter than 3/4 is like you're not casting with anything. It's not going to go very well. You need a more bendy rod to cast with a lighter lure.
Okay.
So you got to make things balanced together. So what I'm using here is I'm using 12-pound test monofilament. It's on the lighter side. It says here 12 to 20-pound test monofilament. So I'm down on the lighter end of the scale, 12 to 20 pound.
Okay, the more sensitive side.
12-pound test casts like a dream. I had 15-pound test earlier this summer on this reel, and it didn't quite cast right. But then I put 12-pound test, which I fished with before, and now it casts really, really well. This is a very good combination. The reel is smallish. It's a 5,000 series. That says something about the size and the capacity of the reel. I used to fish with a 4,000 series. It's a little bit smaller, but I found it to be, in the long run, too small for what I was using it for.
So you opted for something slightly bigger.
I went to 5,000. And I think that it's called a Boca 50. It's a, it's a Cabo. It's a Quantum. the brand is Quantum, which is a very good saltwater reel. And they have a Boca, which is a moderately priced, and then they have the Cabo, which is a little bit more expensive, about $250. But it's a very durable saltwater reel. This is a caster's dream, and I like to cast. Most people think of ocean fishing as something where you just drop a line right next to the boat to the bottom and then you jig until something bites. Well, that's what I used to do with my number 10 coffee can and with my tuna rod. None of this can cast.
Yeah.
With this spinning reel and a perfect balance of line and rod and stiffness and length, I can cast far with the right lure. Far away from the boat. In that direction, in that direction, in that direction, not just right under. That makes fishing much more dynamic. Because jigging can be very monotonous if you are not on fish.
Mm-hmm.
The casting gives you an opportunity to probe.
To explore.
Yes. And when you can explore, that increases hope. And hope is what fishermen is all about. I mean, sitting there and hopelessly jigging is like, I hate fishing. This is really, really boring. That's what some people would think. But the added dimension of casting out, you let the jig drop all the way to the bottom with the bail open and loose flowing line all the way to the bottom.
And how far down is the bottom, roughly?
Anywhere from, say, 30 feet to 120 feet.
Okay.
Then when you know it's on the bottom, you will have to envision that the line is trailing like a bellow, like an arc in the water, all the way up from the surface and all the way down. The moment you tighten that line, it pulls the jig straight up. That's what you want. You don't want to pull it towards the boat at an angle, because the next thing you're going to do is snag a rock.
Okay.
And you're going to be chasing a snag now for the next 5 minutes, and fishing will end.
Something which I've witnessed and have been the contributor, I should say, to many times.
Yeah, everybody gets to contribute to that situation.
So interesting. So what you're saying is, when you cast, but you actually, the important thing is letting enough line go that there is enough extra line out just to create that vertical sense, or more of a vertical line of your line, or vertical flow of your line, that the force is pulling more upwards than would be if you were to just lure in straight away, or reel in straight away.
Once you start retrieving, you retrieve with some speed, and it pulls the jig up off the floor.
Out of the danger zone.
Yeah. And then you let it fall. And then you pull up again, Pull, let it fall, pull, let it fall. So you are going like this here, this kind of motion in towards the boat.
Kind of like almost like a saw blade shape.
You're hopscotching into the towards the boat.
Okay, this is interesting. This is all things that I didn't know. So it's very informative to hear this. Okay, great.
And once in a while you let it drop again. Mm-hmm. Because you cast out maybe 50 yards, right? Mm-hmm. And now it's going down to the bottom, and then 25 yards, and you don't really know what's on the bottom right there. But you got to stay in contact with the bottom to a degree.
Yeah.
You don't really know how high up in the column have you lifted your jig. Mm-hmm. So once in a while you got to drop back down and repeat.
To calibrate yourself.
Correct.
Interesting. So while this is happening, and also if I'm jumping ahead of myself, then stop me. But what tackle are you using, or what bait are you using in this situation? Is it seasonally affected? Is it depth affected? Species affected? Or is it if there was a general thing? I mean, from what I've witnessed when we fish together, you tend to be pretty consistent with the gear that you're using. In terms of...
Yeah, I am. I don't veer very far away from this concept here. It's the twin tail scampi.
The twin-tail scampi. I'm
Yeah.
going to take a photo of that now. I'll put this on Instagram.
Here's two that happen to be the same color. The twin-tail scampi, this is a 5-inch, this is a 4-inch.
Okay. Yeah, I got it.
I span a whole array of colors, all the way from. I'm just gonna take this here. I mean, I have one that is like pitch black.
Really?
I have ridiculous colors that you would never encounter in nature. But then again, we don't know what fish can see.
True. How much light is down there?
We know, well, there is some, not much, not 120 feet, not a whole lot of light. There are some rules about what kind of a colors you should choose when it's sunny, when it's foggy, that kind of thing. Are any of them true? Probably not.
Have you ever witnessed any of those things that align with the folklore of those rules?
No.
So it doesn't really matter what color,
But
apart from just on that day.
yes. It's hard to say anything concrete about it because if you put another color on and the fish start biting, you can draw all kinds of conclusions. Oh, that color must be going really good with the clouded skies, you know, and the lower sun intensity and the color on the bottom. Who knows? Who knows why the fish chose to bite that lure at that point, at that time?
Yeah.
But if you can convince yourself that you have somehow made a profound discovery, that alone will enrich your fishing experience because you think you're good, and that's all right. We can fool ourselves that way. It's totally allowed.
But one thing I would say as an observation, being a guest on your boat fishing, is that you do have a variety of colours. That's one thing that's good. Is that it's one thing to get one of these scampis, and the things I've gone and I've seen the scampi shapes that you have, and I go, I find them online or whatever, and I buy them. But I, in my naivety, only got them in like one colour. And the trouble is, if on any given day you're fishing and that one colour scampi, it's called a scampi tail, is that right?
Yeah, scampi twin tail, yeah.
That one colour scampi tail isn't hot at that moment, and the fish don't care about it, then you're in for a quiet day.
Yeah,
So
that's right.
having an arsenal of different colour gear that you can change over is just an essential part of fishing out there, right?
It absolutely is. I mean, even to give you more options to change your odds, that is such a core part of fishing. If you are stuck with the same exact gear and you're not catching anything, you're going to get discouraged.
Yeah.
But if you can change it up, you immediately have new hope. Immediately. It's a totally new game. You go from this color to this color, it's got to change something,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. And hope is a powerful thing.
Hope is very key.
So what weights and what hooks are you putting on this? This is just a single hook, right?
It's a single hook. Friends of mine fish barbless, and I may go that way too.
Really?
Yeah,
Because it makes catch and release easier?
Yeah,
Or?
right.
Okay.
yeah. I don't really have any problems with catch and release with the barb hook, but I see the argument. So I fish with lead heads from 1 ounce, 1.5. I also use a 2 ounce for when there's too much wind out there, the drift is too fast. It's difficult to stay in contact with the ocean bottom when the boat is moving too fast across the water. So you need to put a little bit more weight on it. So, and when it's like dead calm out there and you are not drifting anywhere, it's a real joy to fish with a light 1 ounce jig. Casts really, really well. You put a small twin tail on it. You may even cut the twin tail down a little bit to get a little bit less drag in the air. And you get this configuration here. This is the standard fishing equipment. The twin tail scampi, the 1.5 ounce lead head, and a stretch of 50-pound monofilament as a guard against the teeth of lingcod and the red snapper or the vermilion rockfish.
Okay.
Because I'm fishing with 12-pound test line,
Yeah.
a little nick in a 12-pound test line, you all of a sudden only have 6-pound test.
Yes. And I'm curious. Forgive this is a slight sidestep, but
Yeah.
this is about the gear. I think when I purchased some gear, when I obviously was buying without having full knowledge of what was going on, and it's great to actually ask you all these questions and have a better understanding. But I think I've been using slightly heavier weights, and I think at some point I showed up with like a 3-pound weight.
3 ounce?
A 3 ounce, sorry. My 3-pound weight would be
Yeah.
it would be a bit of a joke. But yeah, a 3 ounce head, like
Yeah.
a hook head. And yeah, I think that, so that was too heavy, right? That's far more weight. But what I'm wondering is, one element of this, with a rowboat, you tend to only go out when the ocean is pretty calm, given the exposed nature of being in a boat that's very close to the ocean. So in that context, heavier weights would not be necessary because you're never going to be out there when the ocean's pumping or like things are really pushing you around as much. Does that make sense? Or is that not a correct assumption?
No, you're talking about two different things actually. I couldn't fish with 3 ounce with the equipment that I have.
Because your rod is too light.
Yeah, it's too light.
Okay.
Line's too light, the rod's too light. A lot of people fish with 5-6 ounce weights, 8 ounce even.
But they've got heavier stuff.
Then they're back in this class of gear, right? This could easily handle your 3 ounce, maybe even a 4 ounce weight.
So this is one of your heavier early rods that you
Yeah.
picked up at a garage sale.
Yeah.
Okay.
And a lot of people who are out there in motorboats, they fish with much heavier gear than that. More towards the tuna rod.
So I guess that's why I was wondering, and that's why I was asking, because I was thinking if people are going out with motorboats, are they going out in stronger conditions where they need heavier gear?
No.
But it's actually nothing to do with that.
No, it has nothing to do with that.
It's just to do with...
It's just habit. It's what people do. They fish with heavier gear and jig right next to the boat
Yes.
all day long.
So... Well,
The only people who really cast around here when they are fishing on the ocean are people that I have taught in my rowboat.
okay. So jigging is the normal game.
Everybody jigs. And nobody uses a spinning reel. They use a baitcaster reel. The coffee grinder type.
Which is why I've had conversations with other fishermen who saw my spinning reel and were like, oh, you don't want that. That's not the right thing to have around here. That makes more sense now. Okay.
Did you ask them why?
I don't recall if I asked why, or maybe I don't remember what the answer was. But I don't think that there was a very clear response.
Yeah.
Which might be because that's how it's done around here. Possibly.
Yeah.
Or it may just be that I'm being a forgetful person.
No, you're probably right, because there are no good reasons.
Okay, so you've evolved into a far more nuanced, sensitive system with all your gear.
Yeah, you could say that without exaggeration.
Let's talk about bait, because we talked about like lures, and that
Yeah.
works, but I've seen the lures work without bait, but that's when the fish are really biting. But what is your standard bait? Do you ever change it, or is there like a standard thing?
Yeah, well, when it comes to bottom fishing out here, I don't really change it. It's a smallish piece of squid, calamari.
Like an inch cut or more?
Half-inch cut.
Even a half inch?
Yeah, sometimes a half of a half-inch cut. Especially if you're in a really hungry school of blues and blacks, they will rob your bait in no time flat. And when they get in that mood, bait's not really that important, but if you must bait up, you might as well just put a tiny little bit on.
Just a little taste.
Because otherwise you're going to run out of bait before the day's over.
Okay, that's why.
Yeah, that's right. So the bait is scampi, or is a calamari from the store. It's in the blue box. I think it's 1 pound. I cut it in half. I use a half a pound on a fishing trip, and I very rarely use all of it. I'm very skimpy with my bait, really. I don't want a whole lot on the hook. I'm casting. I don't want a lot of mass traveling through the air. I like to cast as far as possible. So whether there's a little bait or a lot of bait on, I don't think makes a whole lot of difference. Although, it's got to be said that sometimes putting on a really big chunk of bait can make a difference. It can stir up the hunting emotions in a big lingcod.
I have to say, and this might be a superstitious thing, correct me, this is completely wrong, although superstition seems to be at home in fishing, so maybe I'm learning the ways.
Very comfortable environment.
But I am fond sometimes when cutting up those calamari, there is the delicious looking end part, which is like the head with the tentacles, and that is a much bigger piece. But for some reason, I don't know why, but more often than not, when you get that on the line and send it out, then that's gonna have some emotional effect on something down at the depths.
A lingcod.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. That's the lingcod bait. You are right.
Is that what that is?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
So that's the moment to roll the lingcod dice.
Yeah.
Interesting. So, I have so many questions, Ejler. Like,
that's good.
Thank you for answering all these things.
No, it's a real pleasure just sitting here and shooting the breeze on this delightful subject. There is hardly any more exciting subject to talk about, maybe except for boat building, but that's a different subject.
Yeah. Okay, so we've I feel like we've done a really good job of breaking down the kind of gear that you've moved into using and the pros and cons of it. But there's some other things as well. There's other gear that goes on the boat as well that plays an integral part to the fishing experience, and things I have written down here as notes. And jump in if there's other things that spring to your mind as well, but like net size, like the net that you use to catch the fish that you're reeling in. A net, first of all, essential gear, do you think? Or, I mean, otherwise you're just bringing in the fish onto the boat, putting it up by the tackle.
No, yeah, you're pulling it up by the tackle. I pull most of my gear up, most of my fish up by grabbing the terminal tackle here down below my clip, between the clip and the hook.
Yeah.
On the 50-pound test.
Okay.
Terminal tackle. Mm-hmm. Grab here and bring it in.
So that's the normal way of doing it.
Bring it into the bucket. Once in a while, I have to use a net because it's a lingcod and it's big and it needs to come in. And this would be a foolhardy thing to use. So I use the net, but the net is not an optional piece of equipment. It is demanded by fishing regulations that you must have a net on board that has an opening minimum 18 inches.
Oh, okay, I didn't know that.
That's the rule.
And so, when you're saying necessity with a lingcod, I've got to just check. Is it because the lingcod is likely to thrash and make a big strong effect, which could could jump off the tackle, the terminal tackle, or is it because lingcod are precious creatures and you want to get that thing in the boat?
Yeah, lingcod thrash around a bit, and they can make a mess in a small boat.
Okay.
You like to keep it in confinement at that point.
When you say make a mess, what do you mean?
Thrashing around, get out of the fish. I have a fish tub with me. A fish tub. It's a Tupperware tub which, when full of fish, has about 65 pounds of fish in it. When it's absolutely chock full.
Yeah.
So that's where we land the fish. We land it into that bucket, right? And if it's just a lingcod at the end of a hook, hauled out of the sea into the bucket, it starts thrashing around. it can easily thrash its way out of the bucket. It has a hook in its mouth. It's thrashing around. Your feet are right there, and you don't want to be making too close an encounter with a lingcod, a thrashing lingcod that has not just its teeth, but also a hook dangling from its lip. So it's better that it's in the confinement of a net. But oftentimes, I actually, when I practice catch and release, I mean, small lingcod you have to release. You know very well when a lingcod is undersized. Then I just grip them by the gills while it's still out in the water, under the outside of the boat, like half out of the water. The lingcod has a peculiar way of, when you get your fingers under the gill lid, not into the gill rakers,
Yeah,
which have teeth.
Yeah, I noticed that one.
Yeah, don't do that. You have your hand in the gill lid. The lingcod goes completely dead.
Like placid.
Paralyzer grip. The Vulcan lingcod paralyzer grip. It's a strange thing, but it works. Get your finger in under the gill lid and close your hand, and the lingcod is completely docile.
And we have a good example of that actually in a couple of videos. So if you go to my my Instagram, The Wild Dispatch, you'll see a video, or two even I believe, of Ejler and myself handling lingcod. Usually myself being directed to make sure that I'm not making mistakes handling a lingcod. And yeah, you'll be able to see a good visual for what Ejler's describing. So sorry, please continue.
Now, a net is a good thing to have on board. Also, if you're fishing for salmon, which is a whole different bowl of gear, salmon is a net is a must for fishing salmon.
And we can talk about that briefly if you want. Like, is it trolling gear? Or is that
Yeah.
is that the kind of the process of fishing for salmon?
Yeah, trolling gear.
And what does that look like? Is it a different rod, different line, different?
It is different rod, different line, different lures, different bait. Yes. In a rowboat, you really get your exercise in if you go trolling for salmon, because you got to maintain the speed somewhere in the neighborhood of a knot and a half. You're also towing 2 deep sixes, the hydroplanes, that brings your bait down to about 25 to 35 feet of depth under the surface. Usually in that area, that's where the king salmon goes. That's the only fish you're interested in, because the silvers, who often travels higher in the water column, are off limits. You're not allowed to catch silvers. You're only allowed to catch king salmon.
Okay.
This year we're not allowed to catch any king salmon at all. So talking about fishing salmon may not be that relevant.
Well,
I don't know how far you want to get into the gear of salmon fishing.
I don't mind. I mean, I think now's the time we're talking about gear. So
Yeah.
no time like the present. If you don't mind talking about
Not
it,
at
I
all.
think it would be good to cover, in the way that we've covered so many aspects of all the other of this gear,
Yeah.
salmon gear. Let's give it the time it deserves.
Very well. Let me go and find some gear for you.
Okay,
And I'll be right back.
sweet.
So I have my own specific salmon fishing gear tackle box with a whole variety of various lures. And I have my salmon rods are always permanently set up. It's a totally different rod, different line, different everything, different reel.
So it's a shorter, stiffer rod?
Yes, it is, because I am pulling a deep six.
Okay. A A deep six.
This is a hydroplane, which when dragged behind a boat, goes down into the water. Gets pulled down into the water. And with it, it's trailing a flasher.
Which is like a 9-inch piece of like...
Small, big. It comes in all configurations, colors. Usually there's a chrome element to it, and oftentimes there's a color element to it.
And it's like a little piece of metal that spins, is that right?
Yeah, it spins. It also goes like this in the water.
Like erratic.
In a random way, kind of. It's not flat. It has a bend to it. It has a little crimp in the end, ensuring that it won't travel straight into the water or spin. It wants to go in a random pattern, go every which way, flashing itself.
Yeah. Kind of mimicking a fish in distress or something.
Not so much a fish in distress as to simply draw attention to itself.
Okay.
And then it whips this around. This is a hoochie, and I think this one here is called scrambled egg.
And it's like a faux mini squid.
It's a faux mini squid. That's right. And it's draping a hook.
Yeah.
Well, now we're gonna get 4. Let's just take a break, eh?
Yeah.
Who the hell is this? Oh, you again.
Hopeful. So this is mimicking a squid, right?
Yes, this is mimicking a squid, and the hook is a fairly large hook, as you can see. It has no barb. You're not allowed to fish with a barb when you're fishing salmon.
Right.
On this hook is also a piece of cut fish, either herring or anchovy, which is cut and threaded onto the hook in a way so that it's usually a half a herring or half an anchovy, so that the head is enveloped by the hollow body of the squid lure, or the tail is likewise embodied, depending on which half you use.
And why does it go in there? For protection?
No, it goes in there in order to sit streamlined and hidden under this squid skirt. If it's not going in there, it's going sideways on the hook, and then you don't catch anything.
And it looks wrong.
It's wrong.
So a fish like a salmon would identify that as something suspicious.
Salmon are ridiculously finicky and difficult to catch. And there is 1,000 ways that you can do this wrong. And the right ways are so full of finesse that if you start out fishing for rockfish, you'll get the hang of it in a couple of seasons. If you start out fishing for salmon, and you're gonna like learn by mistakes and learn by yourself and learn by doing it yourself, it'll take you 15 seasons.
Wow.
To learn. Salmon are very difficult. There's many ways of presenting a desirable thing for the salmon to strike. This is but one. This is a deep six, a flasher, and a hoochie bait with cut bait. Commercial fishermen often don't use bait at all. They just use hoochies. Or they just use lures such as spoons, which is usually like a miniature version of this.
Yes.
A tiny little version. They don't have time for bait. They have 15, 20 hooks in the water, and there's no bait anywhere. You don't have time for that.
Yeah. Mosquito. Got it.
By the way,
So yeah, because obviously resetting gear with bait all the time, that's going to take time, and that's an inefficiency that makes it less cost effective.
this particular bit of salmon gear here, the rod and reel, and this stiffness, and this is 30-pound test. That's pretty standard for rock fishing from a motorboat.
Yes.
This is the gear that people use for motorboat fishing for rockfish, for jigging.
Okay.
It can handle up to like a 6 ounce, 8 ounce weight also.
Yeah.
So this is just a couple steps removed from my meat elevator.
Yeah. Which I'm sure was handy because you had that already and you just adapted that for salmon fishing.
Well, I did this for salmon fishing because I asked people what should I use for salmon fishing. And I got this answer.
Okay.
Because that's easier than spending 15 years trying to learn it by yourself. Go and ask somebody who already knows it. Maybe they'll tell you. Maybe.
You've got to have some generous friends who want to share their knowledge.
Yeah. So yeah, that's the salmon gear.
So, okay, awesome. That's great. Like that was a whole thing I completely forgot about, the salmon side of things.
Yeah, notoriously difficult to catch.
So, say you've caught a salmon or any other fish, you've got it up on the boat, and there's that exciting moment of jubilation.
Yeah.
First fish of the day.
Yes.
Salmon, if I remember, was often what we'd troll for early when we were fishing. It would be like the salmon thing to start with. That could be a miss.
That's correct. Yeah, we start out trolling for salmon. It's a good warm-up exercise. You know, you get some blood moving in your body. And,
yeah, warm up in the morning.
That's right.
So you got a fish in the boat and you need to dispatch it.
Yeah.
You have a very charming homemade item which is called a priest.
That's
but it's
right. That's right.
effectively a caveman club,
Yes.
which is used for dispatching all fish that are brought into the boat. Not all fish, because some fish are released under certain principles.
That's correct.
Which we can
That's
talk about later.
Uh-huh.
But what is the criteria? I mean, that priest, I would say, hazard a guess, has probably ended the days of tens of thousands of fish.
Yeah, it has.
And so what is your criteria? Because that hasn't changed in the years that I've fished.
No, it hasn't. Would you like to see the priest?
The priest needs to be brought out, I think. It's a very hard working tool.
The priest. So this is a woodworker's mallet, a woodcarver's mallet.
Ah.
And I didn't make it myself. I bought it at the garage sale. It looked different once upon a time.
How long ago was that?
I probably bought it in 1988, thereabouts. It's pretty perfect. It's compact. It would float if it fall in the water. Although it's got to be said, it is rosewood.
Okay.
It is very dense wood. I mean, rosewood is the, as any connoisseur would know, is the choice wood for the finest furniture in the world. But it also happens to be have the right mass for delivering the blow that takes the life of a fish. You hit the fish right between the eyes. You don't hit it further back because that's where the meat starts and you get a bruise in the meat. You get a contusion. You don't want to bruise the meat. You don't want any blood in the meat when you're done fishing. We want to eat this meat. Maybe you want to freeze this meat. Maybe it should be used for smoking. We don't want to damage the meat in any kind. We want the blood out of the meat, and the contusion does not help it. So you deliver a blow with precision. Calms down the fish. The next step is then you have to get the blood out of the the body of the fish.
Okay.
And you got to cut it. You got to cut the jugular.
And that's through the gills
Yep. Yep.
on the underside.
Yep. All the way. You cut in here all the way to the spine, and that cuts through the main jugular artery. Right by where it exits the heart, as a matter of fact.
And is that a taste thing for the meat?
It has to do with that blood is the first thing that spoils. So if you don't get the blood out of the meat does not hold up as well, like in the refrigerator or in the freezer, or it's just detrimental. to have blood in the meat. It's got to be bled. The
Okay.
fish has to be bled.
Yeah. Well, that makes sense.
So you calm the fish down with a fatal blow to the head, and then you open it up and drain the blood out of it. And then you put it on ice.
Okay. Is there any other gear which I'm forgetting? Because I was just going off the top of my head. What remember?
Yeah.
I'd say one thing: sun cream.
What did you say?
Sun cream is an important piece of gear.
Yes, it is. Yeah. Well, the necessary ingredients to go fishing is, of course, you have to have a boat, and you have to have fuel. In my case, that fuel is bread and beer. And you have to have ice on board. So, beer and ice are two very necessary items. Some water is probably advisable. Sunscreen, a really good hat. A hat that doesn't overheat your head, because the sun can get quite strong out there. A friend of mine got this cotton hat. It was a fine hat. And then he wanted to make it waterproof, and he melted. He treated it with Filson's oilskin wax.
Okay.
Yes, it made it waterproof. It also made it heavy and very, very hot. It got really dark, and it attracts sun like crazy. So he is overheating his noggin when we're fishing. And I know it's a very important fashion statement for him, and it's a dashingly good-looking hat. But I think he should get himself another one.
He's suffering for.
He's
his
suffering for
fashion.
beauty, and I respect that, and it's a necessity. If you're going to be beautiful, it's going to cost you. But really, Tim, get off of it. You don't want to have a stroke.
Okay, cool. So then I'd say that pretty much covers the gear, that people have. I think, maybe just like actually off of the coast, a couple of miles off of the coast in this area, there is actually phone signal. So in terms of an emergency, if you really need to, you can call emergency services just with your cell phone, as long as it's waterproof, I guess.
Yeah, some people have actually had land connection from my boat.
Yeah. So I mean, I definitely have had signal with my phone. So I'd say that probably rounds up the gear section of this podcast.
Yeah, some people would say that there should be a series of safety equipment on board, if that's what you want to talk about. I mean, there has to be life preserver for everybody on board.
Okay.
That's a Coast Guard requirement.
Yep.
And to that I have simple life vests.
Mm-hmm.
Usually they function as seat cushions.
Yes. Yep.
And there's nothing wrong with that. I also wear a Farmer John neoprene wetsuit. And actually the gear is right behind you if you care to reach back and show off. I mean, it's booties. They're good and worn. They're like ready for retirement, and they got to go in the...
Well loved.
Yeah, I got to get some new ones.
Yeah.
Booties and a 2mm neoprene suit.
Okay, so relatively thin.
Yes.
Thin as wetsuits.
Very thin.
Yeah.
Because being able to be wet without being nervous about it is a form of freedom. And I like to get wet in the launch and the landing, and when we're watching the boat, etc., etc. It's great to just be able to walk out into the surf and come back with a pail full of nice clean water to wash the boat with.
Yes.
But if you're going to be tiptoeing around surf in street clothes, then it doesn't work. So, to me, wearing a wetsuit is a must. I don't ask my guests to always wear a wetsuit, but I do, always.
Yeah.
I feel comfortable in neoprene.
Yeah, I've noticed. It makes sense. So let's talk about fish species then.
But let's talk about one more thing about safety
Go on.
gear. I also used to carry a compass
Okay.
and a whistle. because that is also like what the Coast Guard recommend that you have on board.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you are really like towing the rules, you would also have like a flare gun and all kinds of that kind of shit. There's no limit to how much safety equipment and redundancy you can have on board a boat. And I've been on board boats that had, that had everything that the books required and then some. And I found that my compass, I never ever use it. And by the one time I took a look at it, it was like I couldn't see anything. It was fogged up, or the lens had gone. The glass was milky. I don't know what happened. It was a useless tool.
Because you hadn't looked at it in years.
I hadn't looked at it in like 15 years. So people are a little puzzled about, how can you go out on the Pacific Ocean like a mile and a half offshore and not have navigational equipment? Because sometimes this length of coast here is completely socked in what we call pea soup fog, where you can't even see 20 feet. And being out there on the water in pea soup fog can lead to this phenomenon of sensory deprivation, where the sound gets dispersed by the fog, the sun is completely dissipated into just a glow in the fog. You can't see the direction. Where is it? Where's north, what's south, east, west? You can't see anything. All you can feel is really the swell.
Yes.
And then the sound that comes from the surf. But that sound is like dispersed all around you. And you can completely lose your orientation and not knowing what direction you should go. That is really interesting. And in that situation, not having a compass, that puts a little bit more of a necessity to get your bearing, use your observation, find out where you are.
Have there been times that you've struggled to do that?
No.
No?
Not really, not struggle.
Okay.
But there has been times where I say, okay, where am I? And you look around and all you see is fog. What do you see? Well, you see the ocean.
See the way the waves are moving.
You see the waves, the waves are moving, and at first it's even hard to see that because you can't see the waves as they're approaching and leaving. You can really only see within the 20 feet or 50 feet that you can see. At a long distance, it's very easy to see what direction a wave is traveling. At a very short distance, it can be very hard to say, is it going that way or is it going that way? What is it really? Well, just calm down, concentrate, look, and you'll find out. You just have to look.
Yeah. And if you've done your research and you understand the waves, the direction that they've been coming in and how they're going to be changing, then that will give you the information you need to orientate.
You already know what direction the waves are moving because you listened to the weather radio or looked at it online or whatever. Wherever you get your information, you don't go on the water without knowing a little bit about the ocean conditions.
Yeah. Makes sense. So.
Yeah.
You've given me like a comprehensive series of information about equipment, gear, all that kind of stuff. Let's talk about the actual fish. If you think we have time today.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the fish.
Yeah.
That people are, that you specifically chase more regularly. Out here. So, you've mentioned quite a few fish in our conversation already. You've mentioned cabezone and vermilion and blacks and blues, but I guess let's just go through, let's give some quick informational things about all those fish and some of the nuances about them, size, how they behave, how to kind of target them, if they have specific areas in levels of water that they are feeding in, or that kind of thing. areas, like you said, mostly these fish operate around the rocks already, so that's probably consistent for most of the species. And then even I'd love to know, because this is something I love about fishing with you, Ejler, is that you cannot even be holding a line of a rod. The rod can be like, or maybe you've got like a leg touching or something, and the rod can take a hit or a tap of some kind from a fish, and you know what kind of fish it is before it's even on its way up to the boat. So some of that as well would be fantastic. So should we start with the most common, which I guess is either the blues or blacks? Is that the most common?
Yeah, numerically and biomass is probably true. The blue is probably among the rockfish is the most numerous.
Okay.
Of them all. They sometimes occur in great swarms, and you can get into a real feeding frenzy.
I've witnessed it before.
Where every cast produces a fish.
And how big are they usually?
They're smallish. They don't reach much more than 12, 14 inches. The biggest blue, I think we caught one that was like 3 pounds or something like that.
That was a decent chunky guy.
Yeah, I think that the biggest blues I ever caught was caught this year. Very, very well nourished, healthy, large, chunky, strong, fun fish. And really good tasting. Yeah. And that's not always the case. Fish are not just fish. There's been years where these fish were emaciated, there was no meat on them, and it was not appetizing. And I stopped fishing for them.
Yeah.
Because they were not worth bringing home.
And I know sometimes, at least in my experience with blues, it seems like they swarm sometimes in large groups, and even that can become, which this sounds like a very privileged thing to say, but it can become a frustration because they often in those swarms are not a huge size.
Yeah.
And they will be attacking the bait on your line immediately.
Yeah.
And it's a struggle to even get it down to the bottom.
Yeah.
Where like bigger creatures may lurk. So what's the kind of tactic for that? Is it just drop it as quick as you can, or heavier gear, or what's the...
Yeah, heavier lead head and then drop it straight down and you move.
Okay. Move away. From the masses.
Yeah.
Okay, so is there anything else about blues that you think would be good to talk about?
Yeah, I know where the blues like to be, for instance.
Yeah.
And if all else fails, I mean, I don't really want to come home with just a limit of blues. I also like to catch some vermilion, which is like on the royal scale, is near the top of the rockfish, of the Sebastis species, of the genus Sebastis, the rockfish family. But if all else fails, the vermilion's not biting, the lingcod's not biting, and we don't have any fish on board, then we head for the blues hangout.
Okay.
Right? And we get them.
And what's that terrain like?
It's a pinnacle that rises up from about 75 feet to near the surface.
So it's like a little mountain under the water.
It's a mountain under the water. It almost reaches the surface of the ocean, and it creates an impediment for the movement of currents wherever it's coming from north or from south. Doesn't matter. It runs into this mountain, and it just creates a swirling eddy of moving water out of the ordinary smooth flow of a current, and that eddy brings with it particles of nutrition from the floor that translates into nutrition for maybe zooplankton, for maybe small crustaceans, for smaller fish, for bigger fish, and there's the fish. It's a microecology, and the blue is on the top of that pyramid.
Okay. So is it for some reason I put blacks and blues in a similar kind of category.
Yeah.
Is it the same kind of rules for blacks? Or
No,
do
not
they
really.
They operate in a different way.
Yeah, they do operate in a different way. Yeah.
So size of blacks is similar to blues, or
no, blacks can be considerably bigger. I'd say I've caught blacks probably up to about 6-7 pounds.
Wow. Okay.
But they are more in the 3 to 4 pound when they're like good and well. If they have a good and well nourished year, 3 to 4 pounds of big blacks. But sometimes they can be very indistinguishable from the blues. Blues and blacks are often pulled into the same concept because they are kind of indistinguishable from each other, and they often intermingle. But they do behave differently, and you target them differently.
So how do you go about doing that?
Well, they too like the closeness of the subsurface structures.
Yes.
But that closeness and those structures are different from the structures that the blues like to do. It's a more moderate topography where you find blacks. They swarm a little bit lower under the surface. Blues can be sitting all the way up top.
Okay.
And they're a common prey for osprey, for instance. Osprey and bald eagle. The blues are very often taken by those birds of prey.
Mosquito on your arm there.
Because they are so close to the top. So the blacks are usually down 20 feet and lower.
Okay. And so it's like a rolling terrain as opposed to a peak.
Yeah.
Like rollers.
Yep.
Okay, interesting.
Different topography for the blues and the blacks.
So that's why you have to focus your attention if you want to get blacks and that sort of slightly bigger rockfish. So you mentioned before vermilion.
Yeah.
High up in the lofty heights of the categories of rockfish.
Yeah. It's a wonderful fish.
Describe it to me. It's so obviously blues and blacks is pretty obvious. How you would describe a fish that's called a blue or a black. It's a rockfish, spiky, blue and black. But vermilion, how do they look?
Vermilion is a chunky fish, up to 11, 12 pounds. That's the biggest I've caught them. Usually at around 6 to 8 pounds. That's a large red. We call them reds. Red rockfish, red snapper, all wrong. They are vermilion rockfish. They are pretty much always right at or within the first 6 feet of the bottom.
Okay, close to the bottom.
Yeah, very close to the bottom. Often on the bottom. Directly at rest on the bottom. You know immediately when you have a fish like that on because it's heavy.
Yep.
It's also lively, but it has a softness to it that in the strike, let's compare it with, for instance, its cousin, the China cod, also a bottom dweller. Chunky fish, medium size, not as big as a red. It hits with a shock, and you think you have a much bigger fish on. The vermilion hits with a little bit of a dampened tug, not a shock.
So it's like a powerful but slow progression.
It's a tug.
Interesting.
And then you set the hook. You got it in that moment when you know a fish has taken my lure. You got to make that lure move in its mouth. Its mouth can be clasped around the rubber part of the scampi or the lead head. And if it opens its mouth, the hook comes flying out. In the moment where you think you have a fish on, you have to set the hook. It's called. You gotta apply an upward force that moves the lure in the mouth. Once the lure moves in the mouth, the hook will find tissue. Once the fish is yours, once you hook the fish, that fish is yours. And you can take it easy. And that's very necessary when you're fishing with 12-pound test. Because you can't yard the fish up. Not like the meat elevator.
Yeah.
Which is a non-compromise. There's no discussion, no diplomacy. you obey. I yard up, you follow. Not with 12-pound test and a 12-pound fish at the other end.
Right, because it's got to run.
It's going to run, it's going to take over at times. So how do you know what fish you got on? And I know that this is a pet, what do you call it? It's an item that puzzles you.
It's like a party trick.
It's an issue. Yeah, so you set the hook, you make the hook move in the mouth of the fish, and the hook goes into tissue. And unless it's like right outside on the very last little tissue of the lip, that fish is yours if you don't do anything stupid, which is a common occurrence in the fishing world. I try not to be too stupid about things. I'm fishing with very light gear, and I got to take it easy. I got to be sensitive to what's on the other end of the line. A vermilion has a softish tug, a tuggish motion. The way the body moves when it's struggling signals vermilion to me because of the tuggishness of the motion.
So when you say tuggish, do you mean like it has power, but it's a softer force?
Yeah, right.
Like a gradual increase of force.
Right.
Okay.
Right. It's not a jolty motion, like a lingcod.
Yeah.
Lingcod has this jolty motion, and the vermilion has a like tuggish. And so it continues like that for a while, and you just got to have some patience and wait till it, you got to keep it off the bottom. That's rule number one. Get it up off the structure, because they oftentimes have hiding places in the structures, amongst the rocks on the bottom.
Yeah.
Into which they will seek refuge if they feel threat. And when you have a hook in your mouth, you probably feel a threat.
Yeah.
So they will go in there and they will like splay their fins out and kind of lock themselves in a crevasse or under a rock. When that happens, you have to think like a fish. You have to outsmart the fish. You gotta make it believe that like the danger has kind of gone away, and it like putting down its guard, and then you gotta like get it out of there. You gotta try and envision what's going on down there, because otherwise you're gonna lose that fish.
So it sounds like what you're saying, and if I'm wrong, say it sounds like what you're saying is you need to just lay off for a minute.
Yeah.
Like
Yep.
ease off and let that fish start to think that everything is calming down.
Yeah.
And then when it starts to maybe peak out or starts to continue its behavior a little bit more as normal, it's going to give you a window in which to snag again and like
Yes.
pull that thing out.
Yes. Get it away from its hiding place.
And this is for vermilion or all rockfish in general.
This works for any rockfish that has a tendency to seek refuge after they're hooked, and that can happen with lingcod. China cod is notorious for doing that. Vermilion has done it at times. It's not a common thing for vermilion to do. It is a common thing for China cod to do, and it happens fairly often also with lingcod.
Okay. So, unless there's more to talk about with vermilion, should we talk about some of those? Like, should we talk more about maybe China cod or vermilion?
Let's talk about vermilion a little bit more.
Yeah.
So it comes up through the water column, and it exerts, resistance for the first 30, 40 feet, and then it kind of like gives up. And it just like swims around, and it does this pinwheel swim that quite a few fish do as they ascend up towards the surface.
But without really fighting.
But without doing any real tugging.
Okay.
Once it comes up, it has traversed a body of water of maybe 80 feet. The water, the air inside its body, it has a air bladder in the body cavity. The air inside its body has expanded many times because of the pressure difference from the bottom to the top.
Yes.
And it's now much, much more buoyant. And once it comes to the top, the rule is basically once a red is up, it's up. It can't get back down.
Okay.
On its own volition. It cannot swim back down. So when a red is up, you got it.
Yes.
Then you reach over, grab the terminal tackle, and into the box. Into the box only, because the red, the vermilion, has an awful lot of very, very painful spines. Very painful.
Okay. As exhibited in our video that we have of catching a fish, and I think you got spiked by a red. There's some point where you have a cut on your finger amongst the struggle of fighting some other fish, and that was because of a red that you just put in the box in a hurry.
Yeah, I still have scar tissue from a puncture wound from a vermilion that took 6 weeks to heal because it healed over and then it got infected down below.
Oh.
It was an interesting experience. It's a different kind of a pain. Very interesting. They have a venom
in the spine.
In the spines.
Oh,
yeah.
Interesting.
And you can feel it surge through your body. It's not entirely unpleasant. It's not something that I would do recreationally, okay? but once this particular spine puncture you, you can feel it rushing up through your arm and into your armpit. And then from your armpit, it rushes up and overtakes like your head and your scalp, and it's really quite remarkable.
I'd never been. I'm almost tempted to give it a try next time we put a red up. That sounds.
It'll happen.
That sounds.
Yeah, it's a rush.
That sounds wild. What the first time that happened, you must have been like, "What the hell is happening?"
Yeah. It's happened before. It's happened with wasp stings.
Okay.
As well. So, yeah, I think those venoms, either our body reaction is just the same to two different venoms, or the venoms are related. I have no idea.
Yeah.
It's probably some kind of a release of histamines or something in the body that the sensation is the same whether it's a wasp or a vermilion.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so lingcod.
Yeah, lingcod is also a bottom dweller, but lingcod will traverse the water column in pursuit of food.
Let's talk about size of lingcod as well.
As we have seen, yeah, lingcod, they're like these charming little, very, very beautiful young lingcod about this size here. They look like a snake.
What's that, like 16 inches?
Gar. Yeah, 16 to 20 inches. They're very, very beautiful little fish when they're really, really young.
Okay.
Minimum size is 22 inches. 22 inches is a little small. I like them more like 24, 26, 28. I like them in the 5 to 7 pound range. I don't really like them much bigger than 7 pounds. I think I took one fish this year, 10 or was 12?
It was 10 to 12. Yeah, I think that was also because it was like one of the last days of fishing.
Yes, it was.
So standards get adjusted.
Rules are to be broken.
So sorry, I interrupted you before. The way that lingcod operate in the water, you were saying about like whereabouts to find them or how they behave.
Yeah, lingcod are they're not so much ambush predators. They would also pursue, chase.
Mm-hmm.
And so you got to take advantage of that. They are active predators, and so you have to kind of present the bait in a way that triggers that active pursuit. It's kind of like a cat, a piece of paper at the end of a string to drag across the floor would trigger the cat to go and attack it. But if it's just laying there, that same piece of paper on a string is completely uninteresting. And I think those instincts are very similar in any predator who catches by pursuit instead of by ambush.
Yes.
So you got to present a running away situation for the lingcod to be triggered by. It's very important. This thing about just jigging, yeah, that's good, that's well. Once in a while you got to like reel up 20 feet and hang there for a little bit and drop back down. If you get up high, if you run up high, you get the attention of these predator fish that are attuned to motion as a thing to be interested in. What is that motion? Is that something I want to run after? Maybe the first trip up doesn't trigger it and it runs back down, but you got its attention.
Yeah.
And this thing about getting high up off the floor, you got to imagine it's a craggy bottom down there. If a fish is laying passive on the bottom, which many fish are, their view is often obscured by the very topography of the floor. And if you are presenting the bait all the way down on the floor, you're only presenting your bait to the fish that are dwelling right there. And if you're pulling up 20 feet, you all of a sudden become visible from a much larger range. So it's really important to like work the column up, let it drop back down. That dropping motion is also a trigger for some of the ambush predators, which they see it coming. They may be over there. They see it coming. They go and meet it. They take it on the drop. The red, they take it on the drop. The lingcod, they take it on the pull.
Yes. Which is sometimes why I think I've caught lingcod by accident, thinking, oh, I'm going to just draw my line in for a second and check the bait or something like that, and it's then there's a moment when you get a big hit on the line.
Yeah, right.
At that point, and you're like, oh, okay. So now I understand why that could have happened by accident at times.
Yeah.
And then also it's interesting that you were saying about lingcod naturally instinctively following things up, because we have video evidence of that exact thing happening. As if you go on the Wild Dispatch YouTube, I just put a video up a little while ago called the gopherling. You can find it very easily. And there was a fantastic circumstance where Ejler was bringing up a vermilion, I believe.
Yes, it was a vermilion, about a 6 pound, 7 pound vermilion. Exactly.
And it never ceases to be amazing to me, but an enormous lingcod came up and actually did the same thing, followed this vermilion up to the surface even, and it was just thinking, and this thing was bigger than its head, there's no way that it would be able to get that thing down, swallow it.
No, it couldn't.
But the instincts were there to follow it all the way up.
That's right.
And it just so happened to then jump across and clasp its jaws onto another fish that I had on my line, which was a very lucky situation.
Yeah, I had my fish on starboard side, I believe. You had your gopher on port side, and that gopher was already on the surface of the water.
Flapping around, a 1 pound gopher.
On the surface of the water.
Yep, that's right.
And the lingcod, once it realized that red is beyond my capacity to eat, it swam under the boat and saw the gopher. It said, "That's my baby." And then it took your gopher all the way home.
With great vivacity.
Yeah, you had no choice but to let it go home. And it was spooling you all the way down. It's a wonderful sound.
It was very exciting, that's for sure. Yeah.
And then in that situation, it's important to think like a lingcod. What it has done here, it has grasped onto something that it wants to swallow. It doesn't want to swallow it as long as it's moving and showing strength.
Yes.
It's predator fish.
Yes.
So it just clasps the fish until the fish has no more life power in it. and then it can turn it around and take it down the gullet head first.
And the reason for that is all the spikes?
Yeah.
Is that why?
Yeah. Fish always have to go down head first.
Okay, interesting.
It can't go down the other way.
Which is I guess I've never thought about this, but like an evolutionary defense design, because if a fish is running away from a lingcod, a lingcod can bite it it will only be biting it probably from behind.
Yeah.
If it's chasing it for a second.
Yeah.
And then there will be a moment when it has to let go.
Yes.
And that is an evolutionary moment that fish has a chance to get away.
Possibly.
I mean, this is pure speculation.
Yes.
Under the ocean, of which I am not an observer necessarily. But
that release has to take place because the fish has to be turned around and go down head first.
Okay. So then in that instance, we were lucky because knowing that, we just kept force on the line. You were giving me instructions.
Force on the line.
Keep the line, keep reeling in, let it run, let it do its thing, but never let slack go on the line.
Never slack on the line, that's right.
And then this is a little trick which we can talk about more in later on, but it's a little party trick of yours where, you have a hitchhiker, as you call them, and you keep that pressure on and you reel it up, and that lingcod, which actually ended up being a 28-pound lingcod.
That's right.
Stayed clamped down on the hapless gopher fish, and got all the way up to the surface, no hook in its mouth whatsoever, and you very slickly just got the net around it, and we pulled it aboard.
Yes, we did. After it had thrashed around a little bit in the net outside of the boat.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, you don't bring it in.
We gotta because the lingcod at some point it discovers, holy shit, this is not a good situation. I'm gonna run away now. But it's in the net. But it does its darnest to try and run away. So it thrashes around with all its might, and it's really quite powerful. So you got to collapse the net so that it can't get out, and you got to let it thrash around until it stops.
And by collapsing the net, you mean basically you're over the side of the boat, and you pull the net to the side, and tilt it so that there is effectively no hole whatsoever.
Yeah, right.
What would normally be an open part of the net is now the tilting has meant that the doorway is closed.
The doorway is closed. Collapse the net.
Yeah. So
and then we brought it in, and then the gopher came flying out of the mouth of the lingcod. Because
about that.
Because the lingcod has now other priorities other than clasping down on the gopher. It has a situation. So it opens the mouth, out comes the gopher flying out. It was so touching. And then it was still hooked, of course.
Yes.
And then it lays in the bottom of the boat, flapping about. And then I take it and grab it and get it off the hook, and then we release it, and it swims away.
Yeah. Lives to see another day.
I wonder.
Still down there, maybe.
Yeah.
Telling its friends about the wild experience.
It was wild.
So that's lingcod. Is there any more information about lingcod that we should share?
Yeah, don't ever stick a finger in the mouth of a lingcod. Rockfish has these raspy teeth. Mm-hmm. They can certainly scratch your skin and lacerate you a little bit.
Yeah.
But they can't slash you.
Okay.
So my grip is the grip in the lower jaw with the thumb good and bent into the bottom of the palate, and not clasping around the teeth, because the fish will still squirm around a little bit and saw your skin raw.
Yeah. But
a lingcod, you can never ever put you can't put a finger in the mouth of a lingcod. The teeth are vicious, extremely sharp, and they penetrate to the hilt.
Yeah.
You don't want that. So the grip is under the lid of the gills.
Yes.
And it really works.
And that keeps you safe.
That keeps you safe until you either kill the animal or release it again.
Yes. Okay. And you have specific standards by which you return females to the ocean.
Yeah.
What is that and why?
Lingcod over a certain size. Yeah, you know, I used to be a trophy hunter, and I still am, but I don't know. The value of pursuing like the biggest fish is not as powerful a lure to me as it used to be.
Yeah.
I make exceptions for the really big fish though. The really, really big ones. Not the lingcod. But a lingcod, eating wise, is ideal in the 5 to 7, 8 pound range.
Mm-hmm.
Above that, I've had lingcod that were inedible.
Really?
Yes, outright inedible. And I have a hard time explaining exactly why, but they smell bad. There's something wrong with their metabolism.
Is it? Yeah.
Yeah, well, you go ahead, ask. What?
I'm just curious if you ever noticed an association, because with lings, there is a normal lings, but there's also like blue lings, which have like blue bones. Is that right?
Not blue bones, blue meat.
Blue meat, that's it. Sorry, I misremembered.
They span from like orange, they can be outright orange, all the way to like turquoise.
Yeah.
Anything in between. White in the middle.
Yes. Is there any...
And they show on the outside too.
Yes, they do, yeah.
That color shows on the outside.
And is there like the flavor you're saying about bad tasting fish?
No association.
No association.
None. The bad tasting fish, I can smell it from the outside. When the fish comes on board the boat, I can smell that.
Yeah.
It smells.
And so you're like, get out of the boat.
Get out of the boat. If it smells wrong, it goes back.
You know that you are, in some capacity, evolving the lingcod species to smell bad.
I am. I'm aware of that.
I don't think you have quite that impact on the lingcod species of the whole of the West Coast, so maybe it's okay.
I think I'm the only one who does that. So, but the big ones, they deserve to live. They're the breeding stock. They're fun to catch. I like to catch them again. I take a perverse joy in hooking and landing large fish. I freely admit that. And, well, catching and releasing a large fish gives me a chance to catching and releasing it again maybe some other day.
That's another story.
I don't know if that's ever statistically like something that will happen, but I can believe that it will.
There definitely feels like there's an element of karma involved in that.
Yeah, I like to be on good terms with Poseidon. And if he can't appreciate that, he is the asshole that I always am suspicious that he is.
Brilliant.
Okay, everyone, that's another episode in the fish box. Ejler will be back with even more tips and stories from the ocean in just a few weeks' time. So hang on to your hats, that will be coming soon. There's some really useful stuff in there, but also, I've got to say, some amazing stories. Had to save the best till last, including close calls with ginormous whale shits, and I think you could justify this, actually chasing a world record size great white shark in his rowboat. Top tip, the shark might be bigger than the boat. I just want to take a quick moment to thank everyone again for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. We are constantly growing and learning and evolving. So if you have any thoughts or advice on how to improve the show, or if there's anyone you know who you think would be great on an episode, anyone with wild skills and stories, if they're from an interesting place or they get up to all kinds of mischief outdoors, then I would love to hear from you. Probably the best way to get hold of me is on Instagram, but all that information about how to reach me is down in the show notes. Once again, it'll be a great help to leave a review on any of the platforms that you happen to listen on, or even, I guess, directly with a friend in the old-fashioned way by picking up the telephone or sending a text message and just letting them know about this show. But that's all for now. Thanks again for listening, everyone. And until next time.